This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system to help you better understand what cannabinoids and terpene profiles best suit your genetic makeup. EndoDNA is essentially a blueprint or roadmap to your best cannabis experience that is tailored to your unique needs and body chemistry. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary or retail CBD shop. You'll have the power and capability to purchase products that best align to your genotype. So if you're interested in understanding your own genetics and taking action by regulating your endocannabinoid system through optimal cannabis and CBD experiences, go to their website at endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/products and the promo code is CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of precision cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Gina Dubbé and Dr. Leslie Apgar. They're the co-founders of Greenhouse Wellness and Blissiva. Gina and Dr. Leslie, thank you so much for coming on, ladies. How are you?
We're great. We're doing fabulous. Thanks.
Awesome. So interested to be talking with you today. So from what I've read and kind of what I've seen on y'all's website, two best friends living in suburbia in Maryland. And, now had two, you're both co-founders of Greenhouse Wellness and Blissiva. So tell us a little bit about how you started in the cannabis industry. Was it personal experiences with CBD or THC, or what was it that kind of got you in the game?
And you know what? Our story is rather unique. Leslie and I lived backdoor to each other, and we knew each other as friends and colleagues for a long time. And she approached me with this opportunity one night when we went out to play tennis. And like most women, we were trying to do two things at one time. So we scheduled a conference call on the opportunity on our way home.
Right. And so I was approached by a patient at my medical spa, actually, who said, "Hey, Dr. Apgar, you're from the West Coast. You're open-minded. We would like to use you as our medical director as we bid on paper for a vertical operation in Maryland. What do you think about that?" And I'm like, "Sure." So one thing led to another. We had a call with their investors and folks out in California. And unfortunately, the call did not go as expected because Gina, with her legitimate venture capital background, knows some of the money questions to ask. And the answer she got was essentially, "Darling, you wouldn't understand the math. Let's not go there." So we quickly realized this was not going to be something that we wanted to entertain. And so Gina got irritated, apparently.
Yes,
and
I
she
did.
looked up the requirements for proposal online and said, "Oh, screw it, Les. We're just going to do it ourselves." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I don't have any cannabis experience."
Neither did I.
I got nothing. I got a medical degree. I mean, I'm trainable. I can certainly dive down and learn the science, but we just were really kind of going in blind. So of course we won.
And I have to confess, I was a vestal virgin. I had never touched cannabis. I always had a security clearance.
Right.
So,
And that was going to be my question, right? So Gina, I mean, that makes sense. Security clearance. You don't want to put your job at risk, right? And your livelihood. So, but Dr. Apgar, so like, did you have any experience with cannabis? Had you used it before? Because I know within the medical and healthcare profession, I mean, the endocannabinoid system is rarely, if at all, talked about, right?
Right. So I think it's pretty hard to get through your teenage years and your college years without touching cannabis in some way, shape, or form. So certainly I knew of it and had experienced it myself. And really what I was experiencing practicing Western medicine was that Western medicine was failing all of my patients. That wasn't addressing the medical issues that my patients were coming in for. So I was very receptive to cannabis medicine as a new and better way of healing. So it wasn't as cut and dried as I may have led you to believe. There was some backstory here. Gina was looking at expanding into this industry on her own, and I was feeling unsettled within the Western medicine community. So this did sort of pop into our lives at exactly the right time. But you're exactly correct. The medical school curriculums, really for the vast majority of schools, do not include any training on the endocannabinoid system. And it's a real shame because it's paramount to sort of everything as it functions within the human body. And so hopefully with more and more education, we'll be able to spread the word and teach young blossoming doctors that this entity exists in all of their cells, and how can they better have conversations with their patients around cannabis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, education is so important. We talk about it all the time on this podcast. But of course, due to the Schedule 1 listing, the federal regulation, right, a lot of the research and peer review studies have been halted. They've been kind of, stalled due to that regulation. And so what I loved about going on Greenhouse Wellness's website was I saw the patient testimonials, right? I mean, you had people that have muscular dystrophy, muscular dystonia, multiple sclerosis, like all these different things. And you've got these videos of these patients that are talking about how cannabis is helping improve their livelihoods compared to the other, pharmaceutical traditional medications that we've been, using in the past. And so those N of 1 studies, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Leslie, but those are super important, right? Those testimonials that say, I took this and I feel better than
Yeah, you're so right. And we talk about this all the time because doctors are trained to look for randomized controlled trials to look for a statistically significant difference. And yeah, that's great. And yet everybody knows that you can manipulate data in a big study to get whatever endpoint you're trying to get. And I know I sound a little jaded, but I've been around the block a few times. And when you are on the front lines dealing with patients real time, again and again and again, and you see with your own eyes and you hear with your own ears their stories and their improvement, it's pretty hard to disregard that. I know it's anecdotal data, but when the anecdotal data starts to pile up into bigger and bigger and bigger piles, how do you ignore that? I mean, it's very compelling when you are watching patients get better before your eyes and getting off of their opioids, getting off of their benzos, getting off of their sleep agents, going back to the workforce, being happy to sit in front of a camera and talk about their story with no compensation for it. They just want to help other people and they want to help educate the community at large. It's been incredibly fulfilling as a physician to play this role.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you're, like you said, right on the front lines and you're seeing it all and hearing it all firsthand. And Gina, I mean, I know you mentioned again that security clearance and kind of course, the stigma around cannabis, but now that you're in these two ventures, like how have you seen, whether it be THC products or CBD products, like how have they improved your life, if at all?
For me personally, it's cured my ulcers, which is not something I've ever had happen in my lifetime. And so using cannabis has been personally rewarding. But to watch people in the dispensary, particularly those with Parkinson's that come in with active tremors, and after 15, 20 minutes with a very low dose of THC, they're still. And their lives have changed. One lady sat and sobbed. I can drink my coffee at breakfast. I can read my Kindle. All the little things that we take for granted that are now afforded to them because of a tiny bit of cannabis. It just seems so wrong that we don't have more federal studies, NIH studies. And that's only going to come when we get cannabis off of the controlled substance list.
Absolutely. No, 100%. And what I'm hearing, I follow a lot of news within the financial markets with cannabis, right? And I'm on Twitter what I'm hearing is that the big halt right now when it comes to federal legalization is big pharma and the lobbying that's going on. And of course, right, it's been an uphill battle from the beginning, right? But like Dr. Apgar, you mentioned you've been in this game for a while. Do you see a second wave of maybe misinformation, propaganda from big pharma to kind of stifle the progress that's being made within this space? Or, and what can we do about it?
I think that there's always going to be some of that. But as I say to anybody that I have this conversation with, the horses are out of the barn and the people have spoken. And the data is going to be there whether our United States government chooses to believe it or not. We're getting reams and reams of data now from Canada and Israel and other countries that have legalized cannabis. And so really our feds are going to be left behind, and they're going to have no choice but to get with the program because the data is going to be significant. So what we can all do about it is we can get ourselves educated and we can spread the word by legitimizing cannabis and by focusing on its medical benefits instead of treating it like a recreational drug with higher and higher levels of THC. That's the way to get the public to really rally behind all of us and to really move this whole process forward. Because really, cannabis, it's not all about the THC, and having higher and higher amounts of THC in cannabis plants is not moving the needle forward in a medically sensible way. So what we're looking for is to really focus on the CBD, all the minor cannabinoids, the terpenes, the flavonoids, all the things together that make that plant so powerful. So at the end of the day, let's educate ourselves and educate each other and spread the word. But quite honestly, my experience has been that when my physician friends' patients get better in front of their eyes, all of a sudden now they're more open-minded to the conversation and to participating in the program themselves, or sending us their loved ones to participate in the program. So it is spreading like a weed, haha, but it's infecting kind of everybody. Everybody's been touched by cannabis to some degree now, with more and more states having either a medical or a recreational program. So it's really just sort of an organic spread, but education obviously remains key.
We also find that people are treating illnesses with cannabis that they didn't know they were treating. ADD, for example, ADHD. A lot of people self-medicated for those illnesses, and we didn't look at it that way. We thought that they were going for a recreational high when really they were
Just
self-medicated.
They were just trying to soothe their tattered soul. And especially during COVID with everybody's anxiety and PTSD going through the roof, we certainly saw a huge uptick in cannabis use for that reason. And I have lots of friends in the mental health arena, and they're overwhelmed and overloaded now that we have so much more mental health issues in our country. And cannabis can help in the right ratios and in the right methods of ingestion and with the right education behind it. So yeah, Gina's right. We had made some assumptions about what people were doing with recreational cannabis, but truly they were actually medicating valid medical issues that they hadn't identified yet.
Right. Even if it's simple relaxation, right? I mean, I like to use the term adult use over recreation, but if you're thinking about the recreation standpoint, people like to come home, have one or two beers or have a glass of wine. I mean, that's kind of the same thing when it comes to use on THC, if it's not specific to like an ailment that you're talking about, but with more education and a better understanding of our biological makeup, and like you said, doctor, about how, our body interacts with these minor cannabinoids, the terpenes, the flavonoids, that's when we can really start to dial it in. And that's, I think, where it gets really exciting.
And that's why we developed Blissiva, actually, specifically, because, and I joke that my patients on the sidelines on the soccer field in their Starbucks cup, we know that it's not coffee. We know it's something else. And it's the stigma around it. Like, it's so okay to have a glass of Chardonnay when you get home,
of course,
or two, or the bottle or whatever. But it's not okay to smoke a joint or to have a vape pen or an edible. I mean, it's just ridiculous that it's such a safer alternative.
No calories.
No calories, right?
No calories.
Right? If you get a little THCV, maybe you won't get the munchies.
Exactly.
So we specifically developed a line of products that would be reminiscent of a glass of wine and that relaxation that happens at the end of a long day, but without the negative side effects. And that's why we think part of why we've been so successful, because it definitely touches on what our patients need.
They need a discreet experience that isn't vilified or has a stigma associated with it. And that's why Blissiva is very discreet. You tuck it in a pocket, smells like vanilla or lemons. No one knows. You can have that deep breath or that exhale, lower your anxiety and continue your day.
Yeah, I mean, it helps you not kill your family. I mean, everybody's just like, nerves are so frayed, and you step into the laundry room and you take a small puff on a Blissiva pen, and then you emerge with a smile, and you're like, okay, I can continue on cooking dinner for my family and feel like I'm not going to come out of my own skull. So it's been really wonderful. It's been really empowering, I think, to see the women coming in and just being so delighted that there's a product for them. And Gina was just showing me an email that she was typing out to somebody, talking about how women right now are coming in and putting 10 of them in a bag and saying, hey, listen, I want what you've got. I'm afraid you guys might run out again. And because it's a consistent delivery system, and you know what you're going to get each time,
right,
they really love that, because as you know, the cannabis industry is not necessarily so reproducible. The plant is very different each time that you grow it, and to be able to have the same effect every time you use a pen with a certain brand is very reassuring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the big challenge, right? I mean, that's what differentiates the greats from the goods. But I want to dive deeper into this idea. Of course, we've touched on how cannabis interacts with our endocannabinoid system. There's many benefits with the different minor cannabinoids, and then of course there's also adverse effects of, depending on your genetic makeup and what your biology is. But let's talk specifically about women's health and cannabis. I mean, I know in Jack Herer's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, he mentions that Queen Elizabeth would use hemp seed oil during her PMS and stuff like that. And, so let's really touch on because I don't think that that's talked about enough, right? Is like how beneficial cannabis products can be for women's health.
Yeah, I love this. So it's ancient medicine, and the ancient wisdom of humans knew about cannabis and its positive effects. And they certainly knew about it in women's health, because a lot of the concoctions that women were prescribed or took years, hundreds of years ago were very rich in cannabinoids. So let's talk about something that used to be called PMS. It's now called PMDD. And it is that men, I'm sure, will recognize the signs and run scurrying for the corners in the house, but women get very irritable sometimes before their period starts, and it has to do with falling levels of estrogen. But what's interesting is that when your estrogen levels fall, so does your natural endogenous endocannabinoid, anandamide. And anandamide is what you would recognize as your runner's high or your feel-good endorphins, right? That are your naturally occurring cannabis. I try and explain it to the patients that way. And so isn't it interesting that if our mood is fragile, so we shall say, around the time of the start of the period, isn't it interesting that your own endogenous endocannabinoid is also low? So maybe to supplement that and to give that back and to give the mood a boost is just a lovely opportunity, and one that has been used historically and is one that we're focusing on now. There's also the fact that the female reproductive system is the most densely wired with receptors and also levels of anandamide, second only to the brain. So all of female reproduction, whether it is ovulation or if it's gestation or preterm labor or things like recurrent loss or recurrent miscarriage, is all tied to potentially a dysfunction of the endocannabinoid system. So there are so many opportunities to develop targeted drugs to really utilize such an untapped resource in our own endogenous system that we're walking around with unknowingly since birth. So there's just so many opportunities. There's also medical diseases like endometriosis, which is a terrible inflammatory condition that women suffer from that leads to terrible, terrible pain, missed work, lost revenue, problems in the bedroom. Their sexual function is not great. You can understand that if it hurts, you're not going to necessarily want to go there. And cannabis has proven to be a really effective treatment for things like that. And then what everybody always wants to talk about is sex, females and sex, because all of my female patients would come in and say, hey, my husband wants you to give me a pill that makes me want to have sex with him tonight. And I would start laughing and have a big conversation that men and women don't actually have the same sexual response cycle, newsflash. And it was a big conversation. And at the end of the day, there was no pill to give the woman to do this. But now with cannabis, perhaps there's some good studies coming out now that there's actually one out of Stanford that was recently published that we helped participate in at Greenhouse Wellness that indicated that users of cannabis had more sex and their sex was more gratifying. So the more cannabis they were ingesting, the more sex they were having, the more gratifying the sex was. So there's definitely a link there.
Was there a specific age group that with that survey, or was
it was
the board?
All across the board. And what's interesting is that it didn't matter the chemovar, it didn't matter what strain people were using, and it didn't matter how they took it into their bodies, because that's a whole nother conversation about, you were touching on the genetics and the fact that sometimes cannabis has negative side effects, and it absolutely does. And we're all so individual, the way we're all put together. Like what Gina can tolerate is something that, oh my God, it would put me on the floor for like a week. I could never. It's just the way that my metabolism works. I'm just sensitive Sally over here.
And
But
I'm
Wow,
not,
Gina.
you're not. And
That's
yet,
impressive.
and that you've seen the medical benefits. Well, we both have actually in different ways, but you chronically taking a gummy at night to help you sleep and help your anxiety and all of that has led to no more belly pain, your ulcers are gone, and a significant weight loss, just because your gut is working better and you're not in pain all the time. And my inflammatory markers are now normal for the first time in my life, which is just incredible. So we do try and practice what we preach. My prior virgin over here is no longer. I guess it became necessary for us to test our own products. If we're saying, listen, these are female tested, female developed, and for females, we needed to get right in the kitchen and start trying the things ourselves.
For sure. Yeah. No, and just to kind of go back to how you were describing, specifically cannabis and women's health, and how the female reproductive system is so, I mean, you said it's almost as equivalent as like the brain in terms of the wiring and the endocannabinoid system, and how it's basically like homeostasis, right? It's like what is lacking, what is not there, and what can I consume, aka a minor cannabinoid, that will help bring that level back up, right? It's kind of like a game of balances.
Right. And what's interesting is historically in human populations all over the world, there would be outcroppings of wild hemp plants growing nearby. So humans and the plant kind of evolved simultaneously. And it's really interesting to think about who was evolving who, which is a way bigger conversation. But it is very interesting because intuitively ancient humans have known of the benefits of that plant. And quite honestly, our own history shows how important that plant was in the development of our own colonies. Out of the gate, it was a requirement that you had to grow hemp in your property. Every part of that plant is useful. It's food. It's almost a complete food group if you eat the seeds. And obviously the rope that people were making and the canvas that they were making for sailcloth and things. And it's a pretty important part of human history.
Yeah, and this country. I mean, I recently had FL Morris on from Wisconsin. She's part of South Central Hemp Cooperative, and she was talking about how in Wisconsin they have, they call them, ditchweed, because there's just organic cannabis that's growing all throughout the ditch banks. From back in the 1950s when they were, a leader when it came to industrial hemp, them in Kentucky. So it's just kind of fascinating, the history, like you mentioned, and how we've kind of biologically kind of grown up together, right? It's fascinating.
Right.
What do people think when they talk to you? Like, we talked about the stigma, right? But Gina, you had your prior career had, a security clearance. Dr. Leslie, you were, not practicing cannabis prior. So like now that y'all are full in and y'all are, reputable women in the suburbs, mothers, right? Like successful business owners. Does it change the conversation at all when they first meet you and they're like, "Oh, cannabis? Really?" Like,
Oh, we are like the party favorites.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to understand, wants to talk about it. And what's funny is what people don't realize is you will lose friends. There are people who cannot make that crossing the chasm.
You've lost friends because you're in cannabis?
Yes. And I said to a woman that I've been friends with for 30 years, can we just not agree to disagree on this subject? Absolutely not.
Wow.
You
I
will
mean,
lose
that's just kind of the world we live in today. There's no kind of,
the
back and
cancel
forth
culture.
discussion. Yeah. It's very tribal thinking.
You will also lose your bank. My bank called. When Leslie and I bid this, we bid last minute. There were 10 days left to bid. So I didn't have an LLC, so I bid under my own name. So when the awards came out, my bank called and said, we'd like to invite you to leave the bank because you're with cannabis. And I said, well, when you invite all the men that won to leave the bank, let me know. Until then, I'm not leaving. And so far, I still have accounts there, but you can't bank.
Wow.
You can't get them.
So they would favor men over women when it came to banking?
No, it's just because my name was clearly associated with cannabis. They wanted to cancel my mortgage,
I
my
see.
kids' college accounts, my checking account. It's impossible to bank. There's one bank in Maryland that will bank the cannabis industry. I can't get a mortgage under my own name because I am tainted.
She's dirty.
I'm tainted
Yeah,
with
we're both
cannabis.
dirty.
It is absolutely absurd to rent a space is hard as
Oh my gosh, that was one of the hardest things to find a
Absolutely.
space. It was ridiculous.
because nobody that rents their building can go ahead and rent you a space because the bank won't allow it. Because if, God forbid, the feds came in, they could raid the whole building and they would lose
Seize
their investment.
Yeah, they could seize the whole entire building, not just your, say, part of that building.
Right.
So it has been one of the hardest things I've ever done personally.
And that's why I say people in the cannabis industry are the most resilient operators in any industry, because of just the challenges that normal business owners don't face every day. 280E, right, is a perfect example. Not being able to write taxes off just regular employees or contractors or, any just basic business deductions is crazy. The safe banking, like you mentioned. And, I've heard rumors, throughout the weeks about safe banking will be passed or be presented, I think, this month. But as of yesterday, on Twitter and the people, the informed people that I'm hearing, it's just like they don't know if it's going to happen now. So it's just kind of unsettling right now. It's like how much anecdotal, N of 1, N of 7 research do we need, right, to like prove the value so that these policymakers start to listen.
Yeah.
It has been difficult beyond belief. And I ran a venture fund for 15 years and funded over 100 companies. And this has been the hardest one to run.
I believe it. I totally believe it. Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, like what would your prediction be for the industry, and especially like where y'all are operating in Maryland?
We think that recreational will be on the ballot either next year or the year after. My guess is by 22, we should have recreational here in Maryland. With the advent of the most recent round of elections, more than 35 states have some form of a marijuana program. So it is by default accepted. We would hope that the federal government would pass the Safe Banking Act for their own edification and taxation. But that means that they're going to have to expunge marijuana convictions, and it's a whole cascading set of issues.
It's a difficult ball of yarn to unwind. We get that, and yet it's the right thing to do. But I mean, we're not really going to necessarily go there too much. But the reason that cannabis is a Schedule I is because of Big Pharma, and the reason that it is still there is because of Big Pharma. Big Pharma is in charge, and they certainly don't want it to come off of that schedule. So somehow the voice of the little people, which is all of us, needs to make its way into the political arena to really affect change.
The other thing is alcohol took us out of the Depression. one wonders if cannabis can take us out of the COVID recession.
The revenue from it, right? I mean,
Right.
you could do a lot of good with all of that revenue if they do it intelligently. I honestly thought that might be what they were going to do to help rev up our economy after COVID. But yeah, it's gonna take something pretty important to get everybody's attention to really move this needle forward, because it is demoralizing what you said. We're so hopeful about something as silly as safe banking. I mean, really, this is what we have to
I
talk
can get
about?
a mortgage.
I mean, we can put our money in the bank and write checks.
We can write checks. We can have a credit card. It is so
It's absurd. It's absurd. Yeah. So we would like to play ball. We really absolutely believe in the beneficial nature of what we're doing. I mean, we really are helping people and changing lives. And I just don't know why there's such drama around it.
Well, and that's evidence of like why the people in the industry are so resilient, because they just know firsthand the benefits, the efficacy, how it's helped improve people's lives. And I think you nailed it, Dr. Leslie. That is, it's the people on the ground that are experiencing it every day. It's strength in numbers, right? We need to voice these testimonials, and also show the data. Like, I know that I've read articles where they're talking about opioid overdoses are dropping with these newly adult use cannabis states, that are propping up. So the more data that we can put forth that kind of disproves the claims that big pharma are going to be making or continue to be making, I think will be powerful.
Yeah.
I tell you about patient number one for us. Patient number one was in Afghanistan, Humvee accident, broke her back in several places, came to us so out of it on opioids. It was frightening. She couldn't drive. She couldn't function. She couldn't walk. She was like very gait-wise.
Unsteady. And she was on enough fentanyl. She was on a fentanyl pump, which I had actually never seen before in my medical career. A fentanyl pump, plus she was on morphine.
What is that? What's a fentanyl pump?
Fentanyl is a really
no, I know what fentanyl is, but what's a pump? She just had it on hand, or what?
No, it was actually going in subcutaneously into her skin, so she was constantly able to dose herself, like all throughout. She was on a basal rate, so it was continuously infusing, and then she could give herself a bolus if she needed to, or she would push a button and she would get an infusion of a bolus at that particular time. But it was something I'd never seen before, and she was completely gorked out. I mean, pinpoint pupils, as a physician, you recognize the signs. And she was calling and emailing and wanting to save herself with medical cannabis and just waiting for us to be open and have product. Because our physical plant was finally open and built out, we didn't have anything to sell her.
Not
it was
for a while.
Terrible. We were waiting for it to be produced and provided to us. So she was actually patient number one. We called her specifically when we were allowed to open, and before we were open to the public, we called her in and gave her our undivided attention and started her on a regimen. And with our help, she got off of every drop of opioid in 3 months, which is not recommended. Okay?
She was determined.
I mean, that's an aggressive
determined.
wean. Right. I don't try and get people off that quickly, but she was very determined. Is correct.
And then she took herself off cannabis.
Yeah, so now she just uses cannabis to relax or for, the occasional ache or pain, but it's not like she chose one method over another. That's what people sometimes
And that was
assume.
Our fear too.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's made the transition off. She's clear-eyed. She can drive herself.
She bounces
she's like
in.
a different person.
She's a
Good
different
for her.
human. She looks different. Yeah.
That is amazing.
That's just one story though. That's every day in our lives. We're seeing patients that do that. They bring these laundry lists of medications in with them. And I'm looking at, 15, 23 different medications. And I say, well, which one do you want to get off first? And universally, they'll say the opioid because they can't stand the side effects or what it does to them. And opioids have their place in medicine for sure, but we have really done our patients a disservice, for which we are cleaning up now and certainly suffering the consequences for now. But cannabis is not a gateway drug. It is an exit drug. We are now starting to participate in some studies that are going to demonstrate that clearly to the public.
I love that. I'm gonna start using that. It's not a gateway drug; it's an exit drug. I think that rhetoric is so outplayed. Anybody who says that, I just completely am like, you're so misinformed. Like, and no fault to them, right? Again, because of the Schedule 1 listing and the stigma that's been attached for over 100 years or so. But like you said, we're all learning, we're all growing in this space. Education's becoming more prevalent, and that's always a good thing. So why don't you guys tell us as we wrap up, what are y'all's plans for Greenhouse Wellness and Blissiva in 2021 and beyond?
We really hope to roll Blissiva out nationwide. We are looking for a multi-state operator to do that because we have to have a new operator in every state because we can't cross the state lines.
Interstate commerce, no interstate commerce, right?
Isn't that crazy? I mean, people don't think about that. And I get consultations from all over the world. And, how can I get Blissiva? They want to know. And I'm like, well, it's a little bit of a story here.
We think that Greenhouse will be expanding. We've already done that. We have bid in a number of other states. So we're keeping our fingers crossed about our opportunities there. But, it is becoming more and more difficult to enter the space. Right. The space is owned by multi-state operators, by companies that have unlimited resources. So the independents have no place anymore. If you don't have a grower, processor, and a dispensary, you don't have the biomass to manufacture or sell. So we are entering the haves and the have-nots in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Where do the have-nots fit in, if at all? Because like you mentioned, most of these MSOs are vertically integrated. They've got the capital. Where do the little guys fit in? Do they?
Yeah, so they have to, because diversity is where it's at. And if you think about the alcohol industry and you think about the craft breweries that have something to offer, and you think about the passion in which people patronize such venues, you understand what that brings to the beer industry. The same thing can be said of the cannabis industry. We are not interested in profit, and THC. We're really stubborn, and certainly we would like our business to remain profitable, and we would love to have some help from the feds and the 280E. I mean, don't get me wrong, but we are also very much interested in the medicine of cannabis and touting that. And so what makes us so different is that our shtick, so to say, is that people can come to us and get really good education and guidance on how to take cannabis responsibly and how to treat their symptoms. And I can definitely see boutique grows and boutique processors coming onto the market that are definitely filling a niche role. And as it turns out, Blissiva, I don't know why people aren't taking advantage of the female market. I mean, women are in charge of making the decisions for families, and they're certainly the point of entry of a family into medical care. So it's really a lost opportunity if people don't do that. So yes, it's important to have the little guys represented.
That being said, they're not going to get the economy of scale. They're not going to get the pricing. And as cannabis goes more downstream and mainstream, lower pricing, if people are really cost conscious, the little guys are going to get cut out.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen right away, and that there's some, room to grow for these small to mid-sized operators, and to your point about, the awareness around women's health, I couldn't agree more. And, let's face it, the plant itself is female, right? I mean, when you think about the buds and for producing the actual cannabinoid flower, it's a female plant. So
there you go. I'm going to start using that. Yeah, I'm going to take that one now.
Go ahead. No worries. Take it. No, but hey, it's been such a pleasure to talk with y'all today. Where can people find your website and social media channels if they want to learn more?
You can always find us on Insta at Team Greenhouse MD. You can find us on the web at greenhousewellness.com or blissiva.com, or our book High Heels, which is HEALS.biz. And we are always here. We do consultations and happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah. All of our educational things we usually post on the High Heels website. So if people want to learn a little bit more, there's lots of information on that website that people can learn all kinds of things about cannabis and what we're doing.
That's great. Well, ladies, keep blazing the trails out in Maryland when it comes to the efficacy of medical cannabis and the awareness and education around women's health
Hey,
and
and thank you.
cannabis.
Yeah.
Thank you for covering
Yes.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the part that you're playing. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Hey, education's key. We're all trying to do our part.
Love it.
So thank you all so much. And thank you all for listening. Bye.